I want to thank Farah Griffin and Kelly Jones for organizing this fabulous conference. And yes, many, many thanks to our fearless leaders, our models, our exemplars. And I will introduce my two dear friends and co-conspirators. But I will introduce them in formal terms, so they will not be recognizable to me. But okay, so I'll start off with Tina. Okay. Tina Capt is Claire Tao and Ann Whitney Olin Professor of Africana and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and director of the former director of the Barnard Center for Research on Women. She is the author of 3 books, Other Germans, Black Germans and the Politics of Race, Gender, and Memory in the Third Reich, which is a historical inquiry based upon oral histories and archival documents that explores the experiences of Black Germans during the Third Reich, and 2 fabulous books on photography and visual culture, Image Matters, Archive Photography and the African Diaspora in Europe, published by Duke in 2012, which theorizes the affects of family photography in early 20th century Black German and Black British communities. Her 3rd book is Listening to Images, which theorizes the everyday practices of refusal and fugitivity enacted in a frequently overlooked genre of Black vernacular photographs she calls quiet photography. She has edited many important volumes, too many for me to name, and she is just a kind of incredible collaborator and thinker. She's at work on a new project that is thinking about the emergence of what she calls a new Black gaze. Is there a title for that project yet?
A new Black gaze.
A new Black gaze. Yes, it's to the point. And Artha Jafa.
Arthur.
I always say Jafa. Artha Jafa, who was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, and currently resides in Los Angeles. He is renowned for his cinematography on Julie Dash's pioneering films, Daughters of the Dust. Jafa was also the film's co-producer, which put into practice techniques he had been long theorizing. Black visual intonation is but one of his radical notions about reconceptualizing film. And I think really thinking about film in relation to the kind of the rich archive and practice that is Black culture. This is off of his, I'm going off script, but AJ is also this brilliant curator of Black culture, and we will see the kind of the exquisiteness of that eye in the films that will be screened this evening. He is the director of Slowly This, Tree, The Schoten, Apex, and Love is the Message. The Message is Death. Jafa was director of photography on Spike Lee's Crooklyn and Isaac Julian's Darker Shade of Black, A Litany for Survival, 7 Song for Malcolm X, and cinematographer for Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. There are many, many more credits. And he was also the director of Jay-Z's 444. He's currently at work on, I don't know if it's an undisclosed film project that is going to be fabulous and be another kind of revolution in Black cinema. So, Tina and AJ.
Thank you. He's getting warm now, so that is promising, right? So just in case you got confused, I'm Tina Capt and this is Arthur Jafa. So we are distinguishing ourselves right
AJ.
now. AJ, all right. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming back after dinner. Good evening, Mr. Jafa. I need to start out. It's been a while since we've been on the same stage, and I need to thank Farah and Kelly for bringing us back together to have a conversation in public that extends conversations we've been having on the phone for a lot of time. I want to start out by publicly congratulating you because there's news that you were nominated, that actually Love is the Message is Death was nominated for as one of 3 finalists for the International Prize for Contemporary Art from the Prince Pierre de Monaco Foundation, which is an extraordinary thing. And I start out by saying that because it's a big deal. And it's a big deal for a number of reasons. And the reason that I wanted to be the point of departure for our conversation is that it says something about our current moment of Black visuality and Black filmmaking. That a film like Love is the Message is Death, which has had an extraordinary impact both on your career but also on people who have seen it and engaged with it. It's a milestone that a film this Black, right? A film this Black can be nominated for this particular award in the art world, right? And the question I have that I want us to start by talking about is, what is this paradoxical moment in Black visuality? A moment when we are being inundated by, this proliferation of images of anti-Black violence, images of Black disposability. And at the same time, we're experiencing what is happening with Love is the Message and your work more broadly, which is that the art world, not just popular culture, not TV, not, all that other commercial stuff, is embracing Black work. So I guess my question, I have like a cluster of questions, is how are we supposed to understand this particular paradox? I'd love to hear you talk about that. Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I don't have any sort of big global, ideas about it. I was talking to somebody just recently, I guess a couple of weeks ago, there was an article in the New York Times about artists in their 70s, Black artists in their 70s. There's been a wave of people who've sort of just jumped right into the middle of the sort of blue chip art market, but this is after having had their careers been more or less ignored. I think they referenced a lot of people actually, in particular Jack Whitten, who of course just passed not long ago, and MacArthur Bingen, people like that. And I was saying to someone that it's not like the space of Black art, visual art, is a space in which Black people had invested energy and time and effort. It's not like a space where we had never considered the possibility.
Yeah.
It's not like, there are Black astronauts, but you don't feel like there's a cadre of Black people going on trying to be astronauts. So when you see that there's a Black astronaut, then you say, oh, that's a good thing, but it's not quite the same thing as what we're seeing now, which is a sort of a tidal flood. And that's because, at least in the 20th century, I think, there have been Black folks visual artists who've been pushing up against that the whole time. So there's like Black people not being in the art world is sort of an artificially sustained thing.
Right.
And you've heard me, you, Bob, heard me say this before, and I think it's complicated for a lot of reasons, because if you say Black visuality, when you say Black visuality, and I think I have a sense of what you mean, but one of the earliest critical conversations, exchanges, discourses that I had with anybody about this question was initially remotely, but ultimately in person, conversation I had with Cornel West in the early 80s. And it was really the first interview I'd ever seen with Cornel. I didn't know who Cornel was. I read it, and I was sort of blown away by the breadth of it, the depth of the thinking, all that kind of stuff. And he was talking about music and the kind of things that we typically associate with Black culture. And the interviewer, who I think was Anders Stevenson or something like Steffens or something like that, yeah. He asked me, he said, well, what about Black visual culture? And Cornel's quick response was like, well, as far as I can tell, it's not that apparent, is what he said. And there was a little bit of a pushback on it, but he said, look, I think the reason why, and I thought this was like super critically insightful, and specific. He said, I think the reason why is because the Black church, which is the only institution that Black people have had consistently since we've been here, that Black visuality had never found a home or subsidy in the Black church, because the Black church, he said, was a Protestant church, essentially. So you have that historical tension between visualizing, period. versus a Catholic church where it's not that tension, you know. My grandmother's church was a Baptist church. There was very little imagery in the church. I mean, occasionally you have, you know, like tinted windows or something like that, but like versus like a Catholic church, which is where I ended up actually growing up in the Catholic church. My parents became Catholic. You know, there were all these sculptures, many of them quite horrific sculptures of people nailed the shit and blood dripping. I mean, you know, it was a horror film, basically, a splatter film. And then, you know, but just a lot of visual stimulation, let's say. And I think when Cornell said, well, the church is a Protestant church, I mean, I think he really kind of hit on something that's critical. But the thing was, is like he said, when he said that he thought Black visual culture was underdeveloped or not that apparent, I always thought it was a mischoice of words because I never really thought Black visual culture was underdeveloped, but Black pictorial culture was underdeveloped.
That's a good
and it's
distinction.
a distinction I would, you know, make because obviously when you think of Black people, I mean, I really think of I think when most people think of Black people, they think of how Black people look.
Right.
Strangely enough, how we look.
Right.
How we occupy space, how we catalyze space. You know, a Black body entering into any kind of space does all kinds of things that you could spend your whole career trying to describe the Black body in space. But when you say even Black people dance, you don't listen to people dance and you watch people dance, and that's visual expression, the way Black people walk down the street, gangster lean, all this kind of stuff, Black postural semantics, as Nathaniel Mackey called it. All this kind of stuff is super visual, but it's the pictorial, like the sort of movement, the move of that visual, that acute awareness of visual phenomena to material fixing it material. That's the part that was underdeveloped. And anybody who's heard me talk, you've heard me, you know, as I've always cite, Nam June Paik, who said the culture that's going to survive in the future is the culture that you carry around in your head. And I always felt that the Middle Passage in particular is this profound example of that because Black culture is super, super, super developed in the spaces that I would essentially term immaterial invention or immaterial expressivity, which would be song, dance, oratorical, things that really are not material based. And this is despite the fact that, you know, Black people, Africans who come here are coming from a 1,000-year-old tradition of material expression. Sculptures, architecture, all these kinds of things. So it's not like there was no basis for it. It's just that the Middle Passage itself and then our experiences in the Americas made that kind of impossible because of the material nature of the expressivity. So I think it's these two things, in a sense, clashing, the Protestant church and the fact of the material status or the status of Black people in the Americas. They end up sort of conspiring to marginalize Black pictorial expressivity.
Point. I want to bring you forward because, you know, I totally actually agree with that critique, and I think that you're right, that it's a really accurate and specific critique on the part of Cornell. But at this particular moment in time, you're talking about where it comes from. You're talking about, you know, how its relationship to larger sense of the cultural formation of Black culture. But right now, right, it's not like we can't say that there wasn't a Basquiat, that there wasn't, you know, a Romare Bearden. You know, we can't say that there wasn't, you know, Oscar Michaud, you know. But what we're experiencing right now is something where there's an embrace of this last bastion of an institution, which is the art world. Right, which is suddenly not just embracing the depiction of Black people, right? What you're talking about is what we look like, right? So it's not just about all of a sudden it's cool to show Black people. They're actually investing in work like Love is the Message, which is difficult, which is painful, which is a critique of the entire institution.
But, you know, honestly, I mean, increasingly, and this is just so we can have an actual conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not quite, you know, increasingly, I'm not sure how difficult it is.
What do you mean?
I mean that in the course of the last 2 or 3 years, this thing, Love is the Message, which I made not with any sort of ambition to have it in the art world. I didn't even know that was an option, frankly, you know. I just sort of made it because I was making things, you know. I always made things. And my first ambition was just to put it on the internet. That's, you know, it's very much a thing of the internet in many, many ways. So that was my first goal, and just, you know, comrades or associates like Khalil Joseph, people just sort of intervened and sort of blocked that. They actually said, don't put it on the internet. And I guess they had more of a sense of the possibility of it in the larger art world or whatnot than I did. So, but increasingly, it never occurred to me. I mean, the first time I saw what I would term a completed version of it, I was like, wow, this is kind of intense. I think black people might be moved by this, or this might be interesting. And like, so I said, the first impulse was just put it on the internet, but I never imagined the sort of widespread sort of response to it, you know, the way, I mean, I guess it's kind of like in the same way my dad said he just never thought he would see a black president. I guess on some fundamental level, I adhere to the idea that there is ultimately a ceiling in terms of white people's capacity to identify with black people on screen in terms of media. I feel like that's one of the main things that film can challenge, is it can put pressure on this internal impulse to disidentify with black people, period.
Right.
Not just black suffering or black pain, but just black people, period. The identification thing, which of course is at the very core of the classical model of how cinema works. You see the screen, you see people, you identify with them, you know? And I remember like a long time ago, I was at a conference, me and Alva Rogers at NYU, and it wasn't a conference, it was a class, and the guy had screened, they had seen Just When Daughters of Dust was in theater, and his class, it was two classes combined, they had over 300 people, so it was huge.
Yeah.
They had seen the film before. He would have them go look at films, and then, like Michael Lee was there a couple of weeks before I got there, and then the filmmaker would come in. So Alva and I were in New York, so they had us come in lieu of Julie. And people looked at the film, and there was conversation going back and forth. And this woman, older white woman, she said, when I see this film, I don't see a black grandmother. I see my grandmother. And I never forgot that. And I said to her in the moment, I said, because I do feel like the gesture of her saying it was a progressive gesture. That was the intent of it. But I remember saying to her in the moment, I said, yeah, but what I'm really more interested in is how come you can't see your grandmother and see that she is a black grandmother? How come those two things are split? How come you had to suspend the apparent and obvious blackness of this grandmother in order for you to see your grandmother in her? Like, that's what I was interested in. So it seems to me like that was a perennial thing. So I feel like even with Daughters, one of the things I thought was radical about it, if you wanted to put your hands on something in particular, was that when you actually saw that film, the only subject positions there were to occupy in that classical model were black women. So if you sat in that film for 2 hours, you had to more or less either just sit there having a flat, neutral, falling asleep response to it, or you had to jump into somebody's body who inevitably was going to be a black woman.
Right.
I mean, there wasn't even like the Klan didn't come in from off screen to, you know, white people out so people could have something to identify with for a second.
Thank you for that.
You know, you had to actually be in those bodies. And I thought, like, not that it was going to necessarily change somebody's understanding of black people in any sort of like fundamental way, but I always felt like on the level of a kind of erosion, because I do feel like when people, on any sort of psychosocial level, when people are able to mistreat other people, when they're able to treat people as if they're less human, or not even human, perhaps. I was just laughing recently. I was talking to somebody earlier today. I was just in Australia, and Brooke, the director of the Sydney Biennale, told me that, and a couple of people repeated to me that up until 1967, Aboriginal people were classified under Australian law as flora and fauna. Jesus. Which was, you know, but to me, what this is about you can't actually understand people as being human beings and then treat them like they aren't and not feel bad about yourself. So this refusal or inability, it's really not an inability, it's a refusal to identify, is about sustaining the kinds of divisions that are necessary to actually oppress people and not feel anything.
So, okay, so now you got me. On this place that we're going to disagree, and I hope I'm going to somehow convince you, because you're absolutely right in, the ways in which I so many of us have understood daughters is about creating that subject position which everybody wants to refuse but cannot refuse in daughters, which is the subject position of a black woman. And some people would call it, would shy away from talking about that as what is the gaze that daughters creates, right? And so I want to challenge you to think about the difference between the gaze that was created in daughters and what's happening in Love, and what's actually, Love is the Message, and what's happening also in another one of the films that we're going to show in a minute, which is the White Album. And that what I'm trying to understand in your work in particular is something that I'm calling a black gaze, which is not about seeing from the perspective of a black person, but doing what you're actually talking about is about having your positionality be undermined by the fact that you cannot disidentify, right? That there is something about Love is the Message, and I want to ask you about, when you say, I thought this is going to be a film that will move people, right? Yes, it has moved a lot of people. And the other thing that has facilitated that movement is how it has evolved in the world, which is that, yes, it got taken up in the art world. It didn't go online. It's still not online, right? And so the places that people are seeing it, right, are not the places for black folks, so to speak, but they are now becoming these places where they are confronted by a particular perspective, right, that makes them, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of, okay, now I'm going to use a slide. Can I put on my slide? Can we, yes? Okay, so this is what, I'm a definition girl. A black gaze, a framing that positions viewers in relation to the precarity and possibility of blackness, a gaze that requires the effective labor of adjacency. And so we've been trying to talk about this, and I've been trying to explain it.
I keep pushing back on it because I absolutely agree with the terminology.
Yep.
But the gaze part is the part that throws me off.
Right. Why?
Why? It throws me off because I guess it's in direct conflict or confrontation with something that I think about gazes, period.
Yes.
Which is that they're impositional. Like, I think of gazes as being impositional.
Yeah, if we
and
talk-
like, to me, like, framing the black frame would be a better, I mean, I would get it because I completely agree with the phenomena that you're talking about.
Right.
I do think something is happening, but I think of, and maybe this is because I can only think of the sort of hegemonic gaze,
Yes.
which is a gaze which is always white and male and patriarchal and
Right.
sexist and all these kinds of things, and how black people have even come into being in any ontological sense, African people in the sense, if anything bombarded us in ontological terms, it is the white gaze. It's a thing
Sure.
under which we evolved from Africans into black people. I mean, in which
Sure.
black people came into being. So
I totally
that's my only kind
I
of
know,
resistance.
but I mean, and I'm so
And I'm
surprised.
trying to understand what it is, what we gain by terming it a gaze.
So the part that I'm so surprised about, and then I think we need to watch Love is a Message. The part that I am so surprised about is that it is AJ who is saying this to me, because don't you think we are at a moment when, right, that the kind of monolithicness of the white gaze is suddenly in trouble, is suddenly at a place of, it is not quite as stable, not because it does not command the same amount of power or resources or whatever, but we're at a place where it has become so, right, so hyperbolic, right, that it is a parody of itself. And that the moment when, and that is part of what I think you're doing in both Love is a Message and the White Album, is that you are actually exposing, right, its hyperbole to the place where we can now actually talk about a black gaze to the extent that, if folks can watch Love is the Message and not be moved, right, then we still have the monolith of the white gaze. But I think that what's happening now is that a framing that is so fundamentally about, the power, beauty, grace of blackness, twinned with the pain and the suffering and the precarity of blackness, can move not only black people, right, can make white folks feel like, Jesus, I have a part in this. I am implicated by it. And that is, to me, a black gaze. A black gaze is not about the presentation of black people, right? It's actually about how can watching this not a depiction, right? You're not telling a story. How can sort of the juxtaposition between the now and the yesterday and the possibility of another future, right, unsettle the contemporary relationships that we take for granted? I think we should go to video. How about that? So, shall we do the first film? And we need light.
And she says, call 911. My name was Amanda Berry. I knew something was wrong when a little pretty white girl ran into a black man's arms. Something is wrong here. Dead giveaway. Dead giveaway.
I'm trying to keep my faith. We on a ultralight beam. We on a ultralight beam. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. This is everything. This is everything. I'm trying to keep my faith. Deliver us serenity. Deliver us peace. Deliver us love and
sing praise.
You know we need it.
The description doesn't fit. If not a synonym of menace, then forget it in turn.
The moment need you now. Pray for Paris. Pray for the parents. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. We on an ultralight beam. We on an ultralight beam. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. This is everything. Everything.
The mundane Afrofuturists recognize that we are not aliens.
Mommy, wake up!
But I'm looking for more. Deliver us serenity. Deliver us peace. Deliver us love, and we know we need it. Lord knows we need it. Lord know we need it. You know we need it. The mama need you now. Teach me how to plug it, ayy. They be like, Smooth, what? Can you teach me how to dug it? You know why? Cause all the girls love me.
She said, something ain't right. I said, oh man. She said, oh man, the building is on fire. I got my kids and we bouncing.
This is a God dream. This is a God dream.
I've been dreaming. I've been dreaming.
We on an ultralight beam. We on an ultralight beam. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. This is everything. Everything. I'm trying to keep my faith.
Turn away. Walk backwards. Keep your hands up there. Keep going. Come on back. Come on back. Keep walking backwards. Keep walking backwards. Put your hands behind your head. Right here. Come on back.
What is wrong? We don't have a gun. My kids.
Hold on.
They're 6 and 8. What is going on? Oh my God, you have terrified my children.
But I'm looking for more. Somewhere I can feel safe. And in my holy war.
And now, Mr. Wallace.
That's just me, W.I.G. Competition river ever since 13.
I'm trying to keep my faith.
Why send oppression, not blessings? Why oh why you do me wrong? You persecute the weak because it makes you feel so strong.
What would America be like if we loved black people as much as we love black culture?
Don't make these wrongs turn right. Hey, 'cause I know that you'll make everything afraid of the night, 'cause I look to the light.
When they come for you, I will shield your name. I will field their questions. I will feel your pain. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know. Foot on the devil's neck till it drifted Pangea. I'm moving all my family from Chatham to Zambia. Treat the demons just like Pam. I mean, I fuck with your friends, but damn, Gina, I've been this way since Arthur was Anteater. Now they wanna hit me with the woo after bam. Trying to snap photos of family. My daughter look just like Sia, you can't see her. You can feel the lyrics, the spirit coming in braille. Tumbling of the underground, come and follow the trail. I made Sunday candy, I'm never going to hell. I met Kanye West, I'm never going to fail. He said let's do a good ass job with Chance 3. I hear you gotta sell it to snatch the Grammy. Let's make it so free and the bar so hard that it ain't one gosh darn part you can't tweet. This is my part, nobody else speak. This is my part, nobody else speak. This little light of mine, glory be to God, yeah. I'ma make sure that they go where they can't go. If they don't wanna ride, I'ma still give them raincoats. Know what God said when he made the first rainbow? Just throw this at the end of the fucking play for the intro. I'm just having fun with it. You know that a nigga was lost. I laugh in my head cause I bet that my ex looking back like a pillow of salt. Cause they put the script on your ass like Wesley and Spike. You cannot mess with the light. Look at the channel from 79. We on an ultralight beam. We on an ultralight beam. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. This is everything. Everything.
I'm trying to keep my faith, but I'm looking for more. Somewhere I can feel safe, and in my holy heart, I'm trying to keep my faith.
That's what the police do to you.
Father, this prayer's for everyone that feels they're not good enough. This prayer's
Put your hands up against the wall.
They're too messed up. For everyone that feels they said I'm sorry too many times. You can nail too far when you can't come back home again. That's why I need.
And this war we was looking for. God, please keep my little brother. Cause down here we fighting this.
Could we turn down the light
Just
up here a little bit?
possible?
It's kind of blinding. Thank you. So, did you have something to respond to what I just said? In terms of, okay, so I think there's a black gaze there that's not about, that doesn't compromise this notion, or that is not compromised by what you're talking about the sort of the freight that the term gaze bears.
I mean, again, like for me, what's at play, and as of course I've been chastised for not being terrible talking about what my films are about by certain individuals. It's not so much, it's not about, you know, when you say like how black people are looking, right? I'm always, whenever I hear that, how black people are looking, or look.
I didn't say that.
No, you, well,
What did I say?
you said how black people look. You were talking about something that I say.
Yes.
But whenever I hear that term, how black people look, I always think of it in both ways. I think of how we are perceived and how we actually see the world. Like how it's that when you say how black people look, it's going in these two different directions at the same time. One is receptive and one is active in a sense. And I guess I would say the thing about Love is a Message, I mean, I have obviously lots of different thoughts about like it formally. I think it is an instance of a black consciousness dictating the order or the structuring or the sequencing of what we're seeing there. Like increasingly, I think you know, particularly in film and things like, you always contended with two things, space and time.
Right.
And then sequencing is where space and time meets, meaning it's where, like, things that take up space, they meet in time. Like, they can't, I mean, you could put them all there at the same time. So it's like in the sequencing is where Black consciousness is sort of actively present. Now, of course, there's a lot of formal things that are completely bound up with, you know, you mentioned the term I used earlier, Black visual intonation. There's a lot of formal things that are dictating, they're not so much dictating what it is I'm showing, but in terms of how I'm treating what I'm showing.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of really technical stuff.
Right.
Like, I was really struck when I saw I Am Not Your Negro, because it shares some, there's actually 2 or 3 shots that are in I Am Not Your Negro that are here.
Yep.
And they're the same shots, meaning they have the same content, the same person shot them, but they're very different here than they are there. And it's not even just they're different, like I was talking to somebody about it and they said, oh, the context is different. But it's not just context, because I could just, if I pulled the shot from there and the shot from here and I showed them, flip back and forth between the two, you would see how different they were. It has really nothing to do with what's surrounding it.
Right.
Even though what's surrounding it does contribute to its overall affect, for sure, I'm not denying that. But there's some very technical things that are very different about it that are really bound up with my investigation of Black vocal intonation and just Black expressivity, period.
Right.
So again, I'm not so sure, again, it's just, I know because I respect your thinking around these things, I'm engaged with the idea of why it is that you're insisting on gaze, even in face of the fact that gaze to me, I always understand the gaze is like, in my mind, I always see it as like rays shooting out of somebody's eyes, right? I always see it as like, when I hear gaze, I think
killing something.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's showering people. You know, it's like ray beams and comic books coming out of people's eyes and stuff. And I feel like if I take my grandfather versus my grandmother, okay, or my godmother in particular, right? There's different ways that you can catalyze or activate a space that are not declarative. Like, there's something to me about the white gaze that's declarative.
Right.
It's impositional. But I know, like, my grandfather would come into a space in a certain kind of way, and he would talk, and he was boisterous. But my grandmother, and particularly my godmother, Miss Herbine, would come into a kind of space that had that, you know, Black quietude. You know, I feel like there's a pole. The part that most of us are familiar with is sort of, you know, Black virtuosity, loud, doing a lot. That's what we know. You know, you didn't just put the ball in the hole, you did a somersault, and then you put the ball in the hole. Despite the fact that you don't get any more points for doing a somersault before you put the ball in the hole, we still insist on perioding and spinning and making an expression before we put the ball in the hole. It's surplus expressivity, but that's what Black people are known for, that sort of surplus expressivity, but we know there's a flip side of that, which is less is more, which is the person who comes in the room who doesn't say anything but catalyzes space by their refusal to speak.
Right.
So to me, those two kinds of way of occupying and catalyzing space is something I'm interested in, the tension between those two, how they go back and forth. So the gaze thing to me just feels, it's like I'm having a hard time taking my idea about how a gaze works, period, offline. It's like I cannot envision a gaze that is not impositional. I only understand a gaze as being impositional.
I got you. And.
Versus consciousness.
No,
like,
no,
example.
yes. And what I want to add to that, and this is I think this will take us to the next clip, to the White Album, is that you have said, you know, that your biggest investment in that amazing conversation that you had out in Berkeley with Greg Tate, that, you know, you've always been interested in making things, you know, objects, films, whatever, that move people, right? And so by talking about consciousness, what you leave out is the impact and the effect that a piece like Love is the Message, as well as the White Album, and even more so the White Album, affects, impacts, and moves not just folks who have a Black consciousness, right? So that the response that I keep encountering every time, and because I've gotten to this place where—
But you don't have to have a Black, okay.
Wait.
I have to respond to that, but
Okay.
go ahead.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It's like I'm saying that one of the big things that I am dealing with or responding to is whenever I've started watching audiences watching and responding to Love is a Message. And there is this moment where afterwards folks want to say, okay, I just need a minute. I just need a minute. I can't talk. You know, I need to like gather myself. And, I need to have this space. And I've gotten to the point where I say, don't take that space. Talk about what you're feeling, and let's go someplace with that impact of suddenly I feel raw, I feel like I'm out there. And that moment has a lot of potential, has transformative potential. And that is not about the notion of the gaze that you're talking about. It's the notion of the gaze that I'm talking about, which is you're requiring people to do some work. Right? So if there is, and that's what I think is that the way, and that's where we have to transition, which is to then ask you to talk about the way in which you're moving people, the way in which these films are moving people. And one of the things that the two share is the notion of, on the one hand, this really kind of empty notion of found footage, but also the notion of montage and how that affects people. And what I would also say, and we share this as a vocabulary, the frequency of the images.
Right.
So how do they resonate? What do they solicit in terms of the responses? And I would also add, what kind of work do they solicit by virtue of the way in which you're making them move, right, across a field, across a screen?
I mean, well, the idea of, these images or these image sequences requiring work or making people work is something that obviously I'm very fascinated in. I'm very, that you were the first person I heard say, just give me a moment. Like, what is that moment about? Give me a moment. And I always think like what the work is trying to do on one level is not so much forcing, inducing, I don't want to say making, but allowing people to bear witness. Right. Because the witness part, I always like that term, bearing witness, because it implies there's something gravitational about it. Right. There's a weight. If you actually are, when you witness, it's like if you go into a situation, somebody doing something really embarrassing that you care about, first thing you want to do is turn away, because you don't want the responsibility of bearing that witness. Right. You really don't want to kind of not see it. And I think that's like something fundamentally human. That's why I responded earlier when you were saying people who don't have a quote unquote Black consciousness can feel it or whatever. Well, I know that to be true because we know Black music, which is nothing but Black consciousness played out in phonic terms, I think. And we know everybody's moved by that. You don't have, Black consciousness is also, and I think I have to remind myself of this sometimes. Black consciousness, even though it is it's a consciousness that's subjected to all these sort of antagonistic forces, it is still a human consciousness. So despite other people denying that it is a product of a human consciousness, in its difference, in its alterity in relationship to the hegemonic norm of what a consciousness is, people can still be moved by it. I think that's the danger of it. The thing is not so much that people can't be moved by Black conscious. The danger, the resistance has always been for Black conscious to, in a sense, hold the mic. Like, give me the mic, you get to actually speak it. And there are a lot of things that sort of operate inside of that. Like, say, for example, obviously Black people get to speak. Pundits, pundits. They get to speak, but they're not saying anything. That's why they invite them back. Because they know what they're going to say. They don't invite people where they don't know what they're going to say.
That's right.
They invite the people who they know what they're going to say. Yeah. So it's like that. So often the tension is always between who gets to speak and when they're speaking, from whence are they speaking? Are they, as you would say, speaking truth to power, or are they just speaking the truth that the power wants us to understand? So a lot of the resistance, I think, like when you said something earlier about the art world and it not being commercial. Well, our world is definitely commercial. It is definitely very, very commercial.
True.
But it is a space, like when I first met Gavin, and he saw Love is the Message, that's my dealer, and he said, I said, yeah, I think it should be on the internet. I think everybody should see it. And he said, yeah, everybody should see it, but prior to that, we should put it in the art world. He said, prior to everybody seeing it, we should put it in the art world for a number of reasons. First and foremost, so that people will have to attend to it in a certain kind of way. Yeah. And second, and very importantly, so that we can get paid. You know, and he was kind of right in that. There's a way in which if I had dropped it on the internet, at best it would have been viral, and I would have been in the same position that, I mean, that path, which was the path that I could imagine now, this is a cool thing. People might want to pay me for making a cool thing, a commercial or a music video, which is a commercial or something like that. But I even know from the one music video that I did post Love is the Message, when I was discussing, you know, the artist was like, I want something like Love is the Message. And what I said to him was like, well, what you want is the fact that that was not commissioned. In other words, what you're liking about it is that it's free of your input, or the person who's structurally speaking.
Wow.
Structurally speaking, is free of the input of the person who's in your structural position.
Right.
So it's hard for you to commission. I say you can't commission.
You can't have your cake and eat it.
Exactly. You can't commission me to make that for you.
Yeah.
What you would have to do is to become a collaborator, a participant in the making of the thing. Because if you stay back and you commission it, it's not going to have the quality that you actually like in that.
Right.
And it's, you know, it was complicated the way it worked out because it was a little bit of, okay, do your thing. And to that degree, he really did commission it and step away for us to do what we wanted to do. But then, of course, he had all these minions under him who were still operating the way you normally operate and was trying to dictate to us what to do.
And he had to take them out so that,
Yeah, because it became a thing of we made our first cut. I love it, genius, I love it. And then the next day we got a list of like 30 notes from the record company and all these kind of people. And we were like, what the fuck? He just said it was genius or whatever. So we went down the path of trying to get it to satisfy them. And it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And at a certain point, I was like, yo, I'm gonna have to pick up the bat phone now, because I had the number, the direct number. And I was like, look, I'm only gonna call you if
it's going south.
If you know, it's necessary. So I called, and he was like, we're all good. I loved it. Like, and I was like, have you seen it now? And when I sent it to him, he saw it and said, what the fuck happened? It was great in the beginning. And we were like,
do you want to say
your people have been...
Do you want to say who that is? Okay.
The point I'm trying to make is this, is that at the end of the day, when I say, obviously any black, well, it depends like on what you mean when you say a black consciousness. Obviously, every black person, every human being has a consciousness.
Right.
But when I say black consciousness, what I mean is like a consciousness that's informed by the fundamentally emancipatory impulse of black people, if we can assume that to be something that's fundamental. I hope it is something that's fundamental.
No, I mean, it's cool because your reaction to my notion of the gaze is my reaction to your notion of consciousness, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
And I think that's where we are, that's fine, because I think that we want to get to the same thing, which is to talk about the response, the impact, and how that impact positions people in relationship to one another and requires them to do a certain kind of work, particularly in relationship to a visual work.
Which, like I say, I'm totally into that idea, and I want to continue to interrogate that. But I'm also, as you know, have become increasingly... Somebody told me I was cynical. I don't actually think I'm cynical. I've become increasingly troubled by what I see as the sort of reactive, affective response to it.
Absolutely.
Like, and I don't know if that's just you work in the ER ward, so you think everybody's sick. It might just be that. Everybody's coming to me. But I've been told so many times by so many people that I cried or this or that, that I started to become very, maybe insecure is the right word, but it's troubled. Like the word is really like trouble. Become like really troubled that in Love is a Message's effort to make a thing where I got the beats right. Like I always say, like, if you get the beats right, you can say whatever you want to say, like Bob Marley. If you get the beat right, if you get the sort of sensorial dimension of the thing right, you can say that that Ethiopian king was God, and you shouldn't comb your hair, and you should smoke dope, and don't eat pork. You can say whatever you want to say. I'm always struck, like, walking past fraternities on college campuses, how the frat boys love Bob Marley, you know what I mean? So it's not a split. You can say whatever you want to say. Or anytime you go to any hip-hop club and you see, I think mostly like sisters dancing to incredibly sexist and misogynistic like lyrics because they got the beats right. But I started to feel a little bit like, am I on my path to becoming like a jackleg preacher or something? Who has all these things that I know how to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I need to stop you there because you're not on your way to becoming a jackleg preacher. I think everybody would agree to that. And at the same time, you know, I have the same response to the same response, right? To the, you know, I cried, you know, and my response has been, okay, so what kind of work does that require you to do?
Crying?
No, what kind of work of being affected by it require you to do? I mean, that was Jafari's thing about, like, let's do our work. And so I want to actually use this moment to transition to the next clip.
Okay.
Because I think it's requiring a different kind of work, right? So I don't know if people are going to cry in response to the White Album, but, you know, it's still asking us to do a certain kind of work, so a certain kind of labor. So we'll do the next clip. Thank you.
Damn someday, I swear, we're gonna go to a place where we can do everything we want to. And we can pet the crocodiles. Love. The pure always act from love. The damned always act from love. That's love. The pure always act from love. That's love. The pure and the damned. The pure and the damned.
Well, it's me, I'm back again, here to talk about fear, pride, arrogance, narcissism, all that good stuff. So what is it that stops so many white people from wanting to change their hearts in regards to race and wanting to see the reality and come out of denial? What is it that keeps us stuck right there in that comfortable position of untruth? Well, I think part of it is fear. Another part of it is greed. Greed in that we don't want to lose dominance, we don't want to lose power, we don't want to lose privileges, we don't want to lose benefits that the system of white supremacy has created here in America for white people. We don't want to lose none of it. We're scared. We're scared of black retribution. We're scared of black vengeance. We're scared shitless, and we always have been. Since day one, we put our hands on black people. Grabbed them, snatched them up, put them on a boat, and made them our own fucking personal slaves and assistants for no pay. We did all that. You goddamn right, we're scared. We're scared of losing what we got. We're scared of losing our positions. And we're scared of retribution. So we got a lot of fucking fear, man. Yeah, we do. You hear me, white brothers and sisters? A lot of fucking fear. We're scared. We always have been. You see a black man walk down the street, you lock your doors, you check, making sure he ain't gonna hurt you, you clutch your purse. We're scared. So what we do? Lock them up, throw them in jail. World's largest prison population of black folks right now. It's right here in this fucking country. Wonder why? We're fucking scared. Even the fucking police officers, the coward police officers that kill unarmed black people are scared. We're scared of that retribution, scared of that black vengeance. And then we project, then we pretend and project that black people are as racist as white people. Who the fuck ever taught a black person black supremacy? The first thing a fucking black person learns is why it's wrong to be a supremacist. They deal with that shit their whole fucking life. Why the fuck would they want them to act supreme? I ain't never heard a black person go around acting superior because of the color of their skin. If anything, they do the opposite. It's white people that are taught. I ain't saying black people can't hate. I ain't saying black people can't be angry. But hell, if they do hate, it's a hate that hate produced. It's a anger that anger produced from white supremacy, a culture, and a system of white supremacy. So yeah, black people are angry. Some of them, not all of them, some of them. The point is, face your fear, face your greed, so that we can fucking have a more peaceful country, a more peaceful world. Until white people face that greed that they have. Oh, I gotta be on top. I gotta keep my white privilege. Oh God, I'm scared that the black people gonna kill me. They gonna come get me. They gonna snatch me up the way we did them. They gonna do all that dirty shit to me that white people have done to them. Stop being so fucking scared, man. Man up, woman up. Let's face reality. White supremacy is real. Our country is a country of white fucking supremacy. Yes, sir, it is. It always has been. Let's face it. Let's do something about it. Let's take some fucking responsibility. Act up, speak up, vote. Do what you gotta do. Be active. Protest. Get in the fucking streets. White people have to change their fucking culture of white supremacy. If we don't, it will destroy us all.
A little bit lower on the lights up here so that we're not blind. So we don't have a lot of time, so I think we've got like 10 minutes before we should open it up to the conversation. So just talk about the line between the work that you're asking us to do in this one and that one. Well, not work, but like, I just think there's two different kinds of provocations going on, but they're linked. And one of the things the link is that I read what's perhaps my favorite, the interview with the favorite title of with you, which is Arthur Jafa does not want to be the found footage guy. And that's one of the links between these two. Right. But they do different kinds of work. So.
I don't know. I just have some thoughts. I guess
Go ahead.
I don't know what it's doing. I mean, I guess like sometimes I've been asked, what are you trying to say with a particular thing? And I'm not even sure if that is what I'm fundamentally doing, trying to say something. I mean, in the same way that I was saying earlier, if my godmother came into a room and she didn't say anything, she would occupy the space without actually declaring or saying anything.
Right.
And so the whole idea that you could actually organize media, moving image material, in a way that was not necessarily declaring something, but maybe asserting some things, but not really declaring them, maybe just trying to render something, you know what I mean? And I think it goes back to the whole gaze thing for me. Is like, there's one, declaring seems to me to be fundamentally impositional,
right,
versus you make a thing and that thing is self-contained. It's like, in many ways, its most powerful affect or its most powerful catalytic capacities are bound up as much with what it's doing as what it's not doing or what it's refusing to do.
Okay.
It's like refusal of certain, on one hand, interdictions, meaning you can't do this, so it's refusing to follow those interdictions because it's rendering things that we're not supposed to do, but also your refusal of demands, like what, you're refusing certain demands that are placed on black people, women, XYZ, everybody who's fucked with. It's refusing those demands. So, like for me, like when somebody asks me with this piece, what am I trying to say? I don't feel like I'm trying to say anything. What I'm trying to do is to erect or render some model or I'm trying to render a thing that can contain the complexity of some of my feelings regarding white supremacy and things like that. Meaning, on the base level, I would say the piece is very much about, which I hopefully is different from declaring something, but it's very much about, on one hand, the tension between, and I've said this 100 times at this point, but the tension between what Cornell, when he says the things you cannot not know as a black person in America, which he doesn't name, he just says there are things you cannot not know as a black person. But I would say a lot of those things would fall under the rubric of what we would call whiteness.
Right.
Like, that's one of the main things you cannot not know, meaning like, in the same way, women cannot not know certain things about patriarchy, whether they're feminists or not. Like, feminists and the non-feminists can agree that as a woman, you shouldn't walk down a dark alley by yourself at night.
Right.
They share an understanding of how patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, these things work. So whiteness is a thing that black people cannot know if one is to survive. My 14-year-old son, I am beginning to have conversations with him about this whiteness, like how to talk to him about it, because it's like, it's just basics as this. Like, these are things that you have to fundamentally have. Like,
You can't not know.
it's kind of like the Elijah Muhammad thing. White people are devils, okay? Well, on a certain level, we know that's ridiculous. But on another level, when women say, I'm not going to walk down a dark alley, it is the sort of female equivalent of saying, men are devils. Meaning there might be some who aren't, but that's not going to help you.
We're not worried about them.
Yeah, we're not worried about the ones who aren't. We're worried about the ones who are.
Yeah.
And so it's like saying, in order to survive a terrain like this, it is fundamentally conservative, but in order to survive a terrain like this, one should presume that white people are devils, and then go from there. The ones who aren't, they get to demonstrate that they aren't, okay? Or something like that. It's like how I cannot let go of that, because despite the fact that obviously there are many people in my lives who would be designated as white who I adore, like love. Like all the folks who I filmed are people who I care about, who are white. And it's like, in a sense, I'm like trying to not dissolve the tension between the two, but try to figure out how to render the tension between the two.
I mean, I love that tension that you're trying to set between the declarative, the statement, and the rendering. And it's like, what I think of when you talk about that is I think of something that you said about, you know, a much more sophisticated way of understanding your use of found footage in a montage, which is to say that allows you to do something non-hierarchical with this footage, which is not to declare it, but it is trying to capture and to render something. So I guess I want to sort of wrap up with like the third and the final clip, which is a different kind of rendering. And do you want to talk about that?
We don't have to show that, actually. Does that fit inside of the trajectory?
It's beautiful, but or we just open it up. Maybe we'll open.
Yeah.
Show it. We've got votes saying show it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Why don't you talk about it? Just frame it. No. Okay.
Sure.
Or hit it. Then. there's a big old question right here. Let's start by opening it up. Go ahead, Guy.
Thank you.
I had a question.
And then Kelly.
Oh,
You can go. Thank you so much. Your work is truly inspirational. I'd like to say, I didn't cry. The first piece didn't make me cry, but I found it very compelling. And I was asking myself, why is my heart beating so fast as it was playing? And for me, it was the interplay between the musical address and the visual sequencing. The visual sequencing involved, for me anyway, a linear, what we would call in music, a through-composed narrative, where there was no cyclic, no picture repeated. And it moved between what I would consider the ethnographic, the iconic, and the mundane. And then with the music in the Kanye West piece, there is a cyclic undertone to the chord progression, which is 4 chords. If it were in A minor, C to F to E, and it went like that throughout the whole thing. But the vocals were through composed because he didn't repeat. Mm-hmm. The verses kept going, right? Mm-hmm. And then in true Kanye West fashion, he collapsed a lot of genres in that piece. So you have those 3 layers going on, which didn't allow you at any time to repose, although it was grounded with that cyclic chord progression. I thought it was just brilliant, and I mean, I'd have to see it some more to really truly get into it and to be able to tell you how powerful it was. But can you respond to that, to my response to it?
That sounded good to me. I mean, yeah, I don't have any formal musical training at all, so so I couldn't. I mean, there's certain things I have come to understand because I was like curious about them, particularly like if it's my mantra, my oft-repeated mantra that how do we get the cinema, to behave like the music. And so to that end, I've looked at lots of things about what is it specifically about black music, like in technical or formal terms, that are signatures, signature formal components. Black music, somewhat paradoxically, because I'm fascinated with how, like I say sometime, I could play some music. Like I was in Oslo recently, and I was talking to this guy, and I was saying, he was from Russia actually, but I was saying, look, I can play some music for you that you've never actually heard, and you could identify it as black music. You could say, well, that's black music. I mean, even whether a black person made it or not, but you can say that's black music. So it is a thing, but very paradoxically, it's so broad. Like, you can never confuse Billie Holiday with Jimi Hendrix, with Bob Marley, with Sarah Vaughan. You know what I mean? It's just a million different things that you could immediately identify as black, and none of them really sound alike. Right. And by sound alike, I don't mean like they aren't operating inside of some recognizable genre, but by sound alike, I mean you would never confuse that person with that person in a zillion years. So something about that paradoxical nature of that I'm sort of fascinated with. I'm fascinated with how, even though we could say, well, if you tried to quantify what makes all those things black music, you'd inevitably fall back to something like soul or something like that, or it has soul or feeling. If you start to talk about which obviously black music doesn't have any exclusive copyright on, right? If you start talking about formal things, you can say, well, there's a kind of rhythmic complexity going on in it. Yeah, that's true. But also, it would be hard to narrow that down to some specific moves that people are making, even though you might say 2/4 or 4/4, but still it's very, very broad. You know, so I've thought a lot about why is it that black music, and this is just purely hypothetical now, this is what I've come up with, why is black music so powerful? Why is it mesmerizing to everybody, not just black people? It's not just, clearly, it is not just black people who have been moved by black music, because you can go anywhere in the world and you hear black music. And sometimes in the strangest settings. But what I've come up with is this. It's something like, and this is, I'm gonna get a really short version of it. You take one of the oldest musical traditions in the world, meaning coming out of Africa, maybe the oldest, but for now, let's say one of the oldest musical traditions in the world, which means it's very sophisticated. But like high art or high expressive modes in many societies, it's also bound up with power in a specific kind of way. The analogy I would use is that if you hear music in Africa, its relationship to power is somewhat analogous to the way paintings exist in the European context. Meaning, if you go to the Louvre and you look at paintings, 99% of the paintings are going to be of two or three things. Kings and queens, religious figures, and then the money class. Really, that's 99% of what all the paintings are. Or maybe an occasion it will be a landscape which is owned by the kings or the queens, or the church, or the money class, what they own. So it's either what they own or them. Because they're subsidizing the painters. They're paying for the painters, so they have to paint the things. Even if you take something like Caravaggio, everybody knows he's painting like Jesus, but he's using prostitutes and pimps and people like that as the models. But nevertheless, he's still painting what the people were subsidizing. So music in Africa, in some ways, I think, not in every society exclusively, but it's something you can see generally. There's a relationship between the classical modes of music in Africa and the ruling class. So even if you say the griots are by and large are not singing about common people. They're singing about kings and queens because they have the same thing, they're subsidized. So if you take that musical tradition, thousands-year-old musical tradition, which had been tethered or yoked to the preoccupations of the ruling class in Africa, and then that music gets transported to the Americas when black people are enslaved and brought to the Americas in a very paradoxical kind of way. Black people's movements, self-determinacy is radically circumscribed, but the music is kind of unleashed because the music is then like freed from its natal context. So all of a sudden you have this 1,000-year-old, very sophisticated musical tradition that now is untethered from the stories of the ruling class and now gets repurposed to articulate the stories of not just the peasant or the non-ruling class, but the non-ruling class in one of the most dramatic circumstances in the history of mankind, meaning they're not even considered human anymore. So something about the challenge and the way in which the music rose to the occasion of articulating the existential terms of where black people found themselves is why it's mesmerizing to everybody, not just black people. It's mesmerizing. And because black people have been the kind of canaries in the mine shaft of global capitalism, because we know, slavery has much to do, or maybe more to do with global capitalism, the beginnings of global capitalism than anything. It also is like the canary in the mine shaft. It's showing us where everybody is going. The existential circumstances of black people is where the world is going. So migrant crisis, all these kinds of things, we've been living it for several hundred years right now. So I think that's why that music is mesmerizing. So the question to me becomes, how do you then, with that kind of understanding, repurpose the kind of elemental or formal terms or existential terms of black music for cinema in specific, but black visuality in general?
You might want to extend that too to talk about the first instrument that black people mastered in the Western context was the violin, which was fiddling. And that instrument is iconic, of course, for the symphony and the most prestigious music-making model around.
Well, but not associated with black music now, so I'd be very interested to know how come a music, like you said, the violin, I guess you could argue the piano, the violin, but those are certainly the two most iconic instruments inside of Western classical music. And so it would be very interesting, I'd be very interested. Like I'm fascinated with the saxophone, for a kind of inverted kind of relationship, because the saxophone was invented by Aldo Sax, an Austrian, in the 18th century. But if you imagine the saxophone, you sort of imagine some black lips on it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of like we've completely co-opted that instrument. And why is it? What is it about the marginality of the saxophone inside of the classical organization thing?
Closest to the human voice. That's what.
We're gonna. I need to take another question. This conversation can go on. Go ahead, Kelly.
Okay. Briefly, just a statement and then a question. One is in terms of that article about, black artists being discovered in their 70s, it means being discovered by the quote-unquote art world, because
I'm sorry. I thought that was a given. I thought everybody was going to understand. That's what I thought.
Yeah, because, there's a whole cadre of black people who have been supporting and bringing all those images out for a century.
Yeah.
In the 20th century. So every time I see one of those articles, I crack up. But that
just to jump in for one quick second, what I didn't finish it out. Basically, what I was trying to say is, like, somebody was asking me about all these people coming. I said the reason you're experiencing this is because there's been people pushing up against this wall so intensely that when it came down, it's a rush of people. Meaning, it's not been an absence of internal complex support and development. It's been held out. So.
Yeah, we can talk about that later, because I have other thoughts about why that happened. But I think I want to go to this idea of the black gaze, white gaze, and try to dig into that kind of dichotomy, perhaps, because in thinking about this idea of the hyperbolic white gaze, and then also, as AJ has qualified, the idea of the devil, and they're white devils, but then there are people that I love that are white. The thing about that white gaze thing, thinking about the 60s, when we're thinking, the same thing is perhaps happening with your film. Right? People are crying, oh my God, this is just so moving. But as you said, Tina, what work is this going to make you do? And we can see the parallel in the 50s and 60s, right? Television, photojournalism has, brought that whole struggle into view. People were crying. What work did they do? And they did do work. But the other part of it is, to me, is that some of those gazes were white photographers, white people in television, because if you were a black photographer, you would just be beat up and killed, right? The black people trying to, for the most part, be in the trenches and take those pictures, they were risking more in some ways than the white people, because they were identifiable.
Right.
So for me, then the idea of the white gaze gets complicated, because white people are taking these pictures too. And they're the ones that actually smuggle them out, or whatever you want to say.
Right.
Danny Lai and Bruce Davis, you can keep going. So I wonder about that idea of how do we still keep using that white gaze, or is it just the fact that the white gaze is the hyperbolic gaze, and there are some white people that I love that do the work? So how do we go there?
Well, like for me, it's like I guess that's why I guess the whole gaze construction is a little complicated for me because of that. Because, you start, like when I first took a film class at Howard University, they were talking about black cinema and these kinds of things. And, that was a pretty revolutionary idea, expansive, idea. But very quickly I was like, well, what is it though? You're telling me kind of what it's not in a way. So I was like, and then I started getting what I would call polemical responses to it, and they seem to be not equipped to deal with the complexity of what really was going on. Like, say, for example, if you say black music, well, or even if you say Southern soul music, which is even more specific than black music, half the shit that Aretha Franklin is singing, white people wrote. The words, they wrote the lyrics to them. Or in many instances, white men, rednecks, wrote, the lyrics to some of her most iconic songs. So we know this whole idea of black expressivity, I understand it as a modality of working, but in terms of, I'm not into the identity of the person who was there. I mean, I think you should note it, but it's like when I started thinking about, like I make lists, like the best black films, okay, at the top for me is always gonna be Killer Sheep. But then right behind Killer Sheep is Michael Romer, a Jewish director, is Nothing But a Man. Like to me, those two capture black humanity beyond anything. So like as soon as I have to deal with the fact that this Jewish director directed this film, then I can try to erase him, or the reality is like you try to get to the complexity of how come that worked. I mean, if the thing worked, it worked. You can't try to, speaking truth to power, that's one thing, but we have to speak truth to ourselves first. We have to be real. Like keeping it real is like, let's keep it real. Like, so how come Michael Romer is Nothing But a Man is better than 99% of anything in films that black people have made about black people? I mean, that's really an important question for me to try to address, but I think to me that dovetails, it's in the same sort of general arena of what you were talking about when you say the large majority of the iconic photos of black people struggling in the civil rights movement, say for example, were taken by white photographers. So it can't be as simple as who took the photo. It can't be as simple as what their political alignment was. It's never...
So I just want to add to it is that, part of what I think that you're talking about in terms of the limitations, I think we agree on the limitations of the way in which the white gaze has been theorized and conceptualized. And I think that is really that, and where I agree with you is that the white gaze has always been about exclusion. It's been about a particular kind of creation of spectatorship, right? That does not interest me, right? Because it does not. It does not accommodate, not only black folks as spectators, but black folks as creating something. And so when you're talking, one of the things that I also try and emphasize is the black gaze is not the object or the production of a black filmmaker, right? But it is about the way in which it undermines the capacity to have, a sovereign kind of spectatorship. Right?
The black gaze, though?
A black gaze, which does not necessarily have to come from a black filmmaker, a black photographer, right? So that it comes in, it does dovetail with what you're talking about, Kelly, to the extent that there can be folk who can create a particular viewpoint or what you're calling framing or a screen, right? That undermines the sovereignty of our capacity to simply sort of either consume it, to feel like we can identify with it, and to not suffer any consequences through that identification or through that positionality. So that, again, I'm not talking about a black gaze as being one that we identify with, right? So it's not something that's about identity. It's fundamentally not. And it's also not something that's about empathy, right? To be able to feel with folk, right? I'm not asking, you're not asking folks, let's feel with me. Couldn't care.
I'm not sure about the last part.
Oh, yeah? You want people to feel with you?
I mean, I have to, well, I don't know if it's about feeling me, but I have to say it is an aspiration of mine that people feel something.
Feel something, yes.
Like they have a real strong, pronounced feeling of something.
Response,
yes.
Yeah,
definitely.
That's something other than to say, oh, I want you to identify with me.
Yeah, I started crying, that's so funny. That's a slip. I started wondering about when people said they cried, like, why? Well, was it at the mark of a productive engagement? Not that there was inherently anything wrong with crying, obviously. Because so many things that I love, that I truly love, and that are truly moving, it would never occur to me to cry to them. It would never occur to me to cry listening to a Miles Davis record, which I guess you could, but that would just never occur to me. It doesn't seem like it is stimulating whatever is stimulating. It doesn't seem like it's stimulating those particular proclivities, let's say. I mean, for me, around the identity, subject position, all this kind of stuff, it's like I keep coming back to something that Fred more than articulated as well as anybody, or as bluntly as anybody, maybe I should say, when he says, look, black people have a privileged relationship to blackness, but we don't own it. Right. I think I would say, I would add to that something like white people have a damnable relationship to whiteness, but they don't have to swallow it. Or meaning, in other words, there's a difference between blackness and black people, but I also think there's a difference between whiteness and white people. And like, I think one of the things, the work, and I don't know so much about Love is a Message because the things I make, you know, now I'm thinking inside of the response to Love is a Message, so I'm making things that are sort of become engaged with my understanding of how people respond to earlier things is trying to navigate this space of my absolute conviction and commitment to the idea of blackness and black people's relationship to it, but commit to it in a way that also allows for those things that have some objective or elemental truth that's unbounded from how we feel about them, if that makes sense. I don't know, it might be a controversial system.
So we've got time for maybe 2 questions, so I'm going to take them back to back. So Bob, and then there's one right down here. Yeah. Oh, Bob, you have to wait for the mic. Why don't we do this way? You're just going back to back, okay? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. I really loved your work. I wonder if you could
Can you talk into the mic?
If you can comment on whether it's your work or genre, what do you think is the role of a black artist? You know, what does that mean to you? And I'm thinking of, you know, from the Black Arts Movement and Amiri Baraka or, you know, Baldwin and Wright and just kind of their engagement, you know, whether it be, you know, in today's modern times or just across time and space. What do you see as the role of the black artist?
Wait. We're going to take them back to back. Okay. All right. So can we run that one up to Bob? And because we're almost at the time, so you can answer both together. Is that right?
My question is whether you think about genre. And the reason I ask is very specific. Of the 3 films I saw, the first and the third, I didn't see them. I didn't see them as genre films. My experience of seeing them was not. I did not see them as genre films. The first and the third.
But you saw the second one as a genre film?
The second, well, I don't have a thesis, but I'm just talking about my. It immediately felt like a horror. It immediately felt like I was watching a horror movie.
The last one.
The middle one.
The middle one.
The White Album.
The middle one.
But that was because of the guy.
Yeah. So, and I just was, and so my only question is whether you ever think in terms of, you know, you talk about getting the beat right and all of that, and I get that, but I was just kind of wondering whether you ever think in terms of genre, or whether in that, I mean, you know, in that, you know, I mean, I was thinking like, you know, Bergman, I was thinking all sorts of things went through my head when I saw that figure. But when I reflected on what I was seeing and feeling, it felt to me like, my thought was, I mean, you know, I'm worried in the same way that I would be worried, you know, when I was watching, or that I worry when I watch horror movies.
So you've got 2 questions, genre and.
Well, the first question I can answer that one really quickly because I don't think black artists are obligated or their role. I don't subscribe to that personally. I don't. I'm a libertine. I want to do what the
You're
fuck
libertine.
Yeah, I just want to do what I want to do, basically. And people can like it or not like it. I like when they do like it. I don't care so much when they don't like it, but whatever. Everybody gets to have their opinions. But I think part of an insistence on people being free is that people have to really be free. Now, we are also free to not like the shit, too. You know, like, I didn't think Dana Schultz's painting deserved all the acrimony it got, but people were free to hate that shit. But when people start saying things like, we need to destroy the painting, then that's absurd to me, because I'm like, if we're gonna go down that path of destroying art, there's about a zillion things that need to be destroyed before we could even consider her painting. It's just absurd. It doesn't make any sense. It's just ridiculous. So that's my just quick response to that. People should do what they want to do, and we get to like it or not like it. I like what I like, but that doesn't mean that's the role of the artist to do it because I like it. It just means I like it. Okay, genres. I know what genres are. And I occasionally do think about them, but I never do think about them too much in terms of when I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just sort of doing what I'm doing, and I'm aware. That's why I was trying to say the first 2, or you.
The first and the third.
Didn't seem like
Love and Alta didn't seem like it.
But that's what I was saying. That's why I immediately said, so the middle one did seem like a genre thing? I'm not saying it like as a critique. I'm just asking because the thing for me is like, I'm very aware, like.
It was the ghoul, the zombie.
I think Black Life is inherently a horror film, so I always feel like anytime you get it right, it's gonna feel like a horror film. Huh? Oh yeah, no. Look, I'm not trying to be it's all right. I'm not trying to be contentious in the thing. I'm just saying that, like, straightforwardly, I've only thought about genre in very, very, very narrow circumstances. Like with the last thing, because it's actually a trailer for a legitimate movie, like a feature film with actors and people walking around pretending to be somebody else. I mean, because it is that, and because it's gonna require, like feature film financing and stuff, then I'm cognizant of it, like in that respect. Like, so when I showed it to a friend who is supposed to be in it, she's a close confidant with me, and she's gonna be in it as well. The first thing she said was like, I knew it was a music bio, which I had never thought of it in those terms. I knew it was a music bio, but I didn't realize it was a horror film too.
Okay.
And I just laughed and I said, yeah, it is a horror film too, because even when I pitched it, it's a film about Robert Johnson, meaning like it's a narrative, feature, dramatic film about Robert Johnson. The way I even pitched it to the studio people is I just said, like, look, he was the first rock star in Mississippi was Transylvania. So, yeah.
Word. So on that fabulous note, I'm going to thank Arthur. Have you helped me thank Arthur Jafa for a wonderful conversation?